To our special council meeting for August 14th, 2023. I'd like to call the meeting to order and all members of council are in attendance. We acknowledge that this land is the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of the First Nations, comprised of the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi peoples, and of the Huron-Wyandot peoples. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and of all the original peoples of Turtle Island who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. Any declarations of conflicts of interest from members of council? Seeing none, I need a mover of the adoption of the published agenda, please. Councillor Mady, Councillor Allard, any questions? Seeing none, all in favor. And that is carried unanimously. And we will go to reports from administration. We have Cynthia Swift here, the lead audit engagement partner from KPMG, and we will pass it along to our Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer, Ms. Drusevich.
Good afternoon through the chair. We are here today to present to you the 2022 draft consolidated financial statements. These statements describe our financial position at December 31st, 2022. We did have an addendum to page 2 of the financial statements. That would be page 8 of your agenda package. This was just simply a reclassification between our expense groupings. It resulted in no bottom line change. Before we head into our presentation, I want to extend a big thank you to Anne-Marie Eunice, our Manager, Finance and Business Services, as well as her entire team. The year end is a very extensive exercise. It begins in February and it goes through to the financial statement adoption, which would be tonight. Pending council approval. This year, Anne-Marie was able to deliver to Cynthia draft pre-PSAB statements, and this will hopefully allow in the future for more accurate month-end reporting, as well as an increased turnaround for Cynthia and her team with the PSAS statements that they complete for us each year. So moving on, I would like to welcome our audit partner, Cynthia Swift, to the meeting, and I'd like to thank her and her team for all of their hard work this year. Each year we do make improvements to the process, and this year we continued that trend. So Cynthia, I'll let you take it away from here.
Thanks. Sorry. Thanks, Kate. And thanks for having me, your worship and members of council. I apologize for being not in person. I do have another meeting at 6 o'clock as well. So in front of you is the consolidated financial statements for the corporation. And as Kate explained, it's for your year end, December 31st, 2022. So on the next page, KPMG is ready to issue our unmodified on the following, that's management's responsibility, sorry. But the next page, KPMG is ready to issue our independent auditor's report, subject to discussions with council tonight and approval of those financial statements by council. As Kate mentioned, the year end is complete and all of our procedures are complete. And I'd like to thank Kate and her team, Anne-Marie, especially with respect to the full cooperation received from management. I'll just go on page 7 of your package, which is the consolidated statement of financial position. I just want to comment that the organization and the municipality is in strong financial position. You'll see that your total financial assets are $95 million, an increase of $87 million from $87 million in 2021. Nothing really significant changes here, just a few highlights. You'll see that your investment in ELK is fairly consistent with the prior year at $13.9 million. You have a strong cash position, which includes cash for operations as well as your reserve funds. And the only other new item in financial assets is the long-term receivable, and that's a loan of $3.5 million from a developer for a front-end loan, development loan. Down below, you'll see your financial liabilities of $34.9 million. Just a few highlights here. You'll see that deferred revenue is $4.4 million. And really, those are the statutory obligatory reserve funds that you have to show up in liabilities as opposed to in your accumulated surplus, which is in note 7. So those types of reserves would be the reserves for gas tax audit, gas tax funds, and primarily the infrastructure fund, as well as development charges. And just one other note on this page, long-term debt is fairly consistent with the prior year, a slight increase. That includes a new debt of $2.3 million almost for the Harrow Streetscaping project, but that was offset by $2.2 million of the required principal payments on your debt. And then you'll notice that down below under non-financial assets, your tangible capital assets, so that's your infrastructure, is $199 million, an increase from $193 million. And the primary components there are $13 million of addition, offset by $7 million of amortization. And then finally, you'll see your accumulated surplus has increased from $247 million up to $260 million. And so that is the healthy financial position, and note 7 details the components of that, which are your tangible capital assets, your reserve and reserve funds, and operating funds, and then your investment in ELK. Moving on to the next page, page 8 in your package, that is the statement of consolidated statement of operations. Total revenues, $50 million, up $7 million. Everything is fairly consistent. However, you'll notice interest and penalties have increased significantly by $1.3 million. That's because of the amount of cash and in your reserve funds, as well as the increase in interest rates. So that was good for the town. Expenses are fairly consistent. So these expenses include salaries, materials, services, amortization, and the interest on your debt payments. So this leaves an annual surplus of $12.7 million. And just to note, these are, as Kate mentioned, public sector accounting standard statements. So it's slightly, these statements are different from your budgeting process, because within your budget, you're looking at your cash payments. So when we take the results for the year, we change the statements as all municipalities do. And we adopt PSAB, and that would be capitalizing your tangible capital assets, moving your debt payments off of the income statement onto the statement of financial position, and things like that. So there are some differences. So that's why your surplus is different than what you would expect from your budgeting process. So those are the highlights of the financial statements. All of the notes are included to give you to state your significant accounting policies, as well as just some details on the various sections of the financial statements. So moving on to the second memo is the audit findings report. So this report here is to help you as members of council discharge your responsibilities with respect to the year-end financial reporting purpose. And it includes some of the required disclosures that are required from the auditor reporting to council. And so as I mentioned, just some of the key highlights, I don't think we need to go page by page. This is in your package, but as I mentioned, we did have the full cooperation of management. The good news is that there were no audit differences to report, so everything is in good shape when we receive the information, and no internal control deficiencies to note to council. So I think those are really good comments with respect to management's performance. We did adopt in 2022, there was a new audit standard entitled risk assessment. So we did undergo that change through the audit. And as well, the only comment I would like to note is that for next year, there is a significant accounting standard change with respect to asset retirement obligations. And we're working with management through, we'll continue to work with management throughout the rest of the year in order to make sure that that standard is adopted properly. And then finally, with respect to this package here is the other item that I like to note is that KPMG is independent of the corporation. That's a required disclosure as well. And then just within the package, there's various pages on how we assess risk and some of the procedures that we do on each of the significant components of those financial statements that we went through. And then there are a few appendices attached to that report, and that's for thought leadership for members of council if you're interested in reviewing any of that information. So I think really those are the highlights for the audit in the year end, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have for KPMG and myself.
Thank you, Cynthia, for your presentation. Any questions from members of council to either Cynthia or our administration? Councillor McGuire Blaze.
Thank you through the chair. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to go back up into my notes. Back up at the top where it says we were talking about revenues. There is a section said other for $15 million. We budgeted other for $15 million, and then our actual was only $1.5 million. What does other fall into? Like, where would that funds? Where were we looking for those funds to come from?
Actually, I can try to answer that, but I just noticed that that number probably is not correct, because that is a significant number for with respect to taxation, and I'm not sure if Anne Marie can help me out there, or because I don't unless it's a footing, and I apologize that that is there. I'm just looking through my notes here.
Okay, thank you, Cynthia. Director Drusevich, I believe it's on page 8 for members of council.
Through the chair, you're referring to the budgeted amount of 15 million under other? Yeah. Anne Marie, are you okay to answer this? She's just pulling it up. If you just give us 1 second.
On that, are there any other questions or comments from members of council? Councillor McGuire, please.
I did have another question on the difference between budget and actual for 2022 in the annual surplus. The annual surplus we budgeted for 24 million, the actual was only 12 million. And I'm wondering if that's because above there's 15 million somewhere, and which is why I was waiting to ask that question before I found out about the 15 million.
I'm just pulling it up too as well, Anne Marie. I can try to answer that question through you, Your Worship. The reporting package does have a total revenue budgeted for other of $15 million. And really, when you look at the cash other, it's $831,000. And then there was $14 million added in your budget for other capital, and that would include maybe there was anticipated capital revenues or grants that you were expecting that because of the timing of the year end, it could be a different funding announcement or a funding announcement that was not received. I don't know if that helps you at all, Anne Marie, there on the budget, but that's what that we do have in our file with respect to the budget. I don't have the detailed budget document in front of me, though.
Yeah.
But
That's
having,
through the chair. So that difference in there from, and we look at the budget is we actually do include the prior year funding from our capital assets, our capital projects into our, and other, when we look at our budget numbers. So that we're including, all the, well, I guess anything that we would have had in some of the reserves that, or reserves or grants that we thought we were going to get from, any of our capital projects. So we're including that whole cost in there, because that would have all, for many of our prior year funding would have more than likely been moved over to reserves, and we're just using it in there. So it wouldn't be related to 22, but more like 21 or prior projects.
Okay, further Director Drusevich, and then we'll go back to Councillor McGuire, please.
Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the $15 million question. So what Anne-Marie is trying to say is that any project that's not completed, in the financials, we have to match revenues to expenses. So say it was a 21 project and we had thought we were going to use grants, right, to cover that expense. The project didn't get done. What Anne-Marie was saying is we put it into reserve at 2021. And then when the expense is incurred, we pull it all out and it goes into other. So that other is genuinely all carry forward projects that were completed in 2022. We already would have recognized the revenue in 21. That's why it's being lumped into other. I don't know if that makes, clarifies that question for you, but next I'd like to walk through this note disclosure here. And can you just scroll up, Abby, so we can reference what note it is? So this is note 12. So what our audit partner, Cynthia Swift, was alluding to was that the budget exercise at the town is different than what the auditors present to us, because we don't budget for amortization expense, right? That is genuinely just a PSAB entry. So what we budget for is the actual cash outlay for an item, right? So to give you an example, say we pay $100,000 for a truck, that's what is shown in our budget, right? The actual cash outlay. But accounting standards say, no, we don't want you to budget for that 100,000. We want you to budget for the use of it, right? Again, matching the revenue to the expenses. So if you're using it over 10 years, you're going to budget for $10,000 each year. And that's what these statements are really doing. They're bringing us from a cash basis to a use basis, right? Matching the revenues to the and expenses to the use of the asset. So it's going to look really different than what the budget's presented as. And that's what this note is doing. It's saying, let's get us to, this is what your budget looked like as you adopted it, right? This was cash, literally cash coming in, but we need to get it to actual use or actual revenue incurred, right? So again, based on use, not necessarily cash. So this note describes it quite well. And basically what it's saying is we've budgeted for revenue of 48 million from operating, right? And 34 million in capital. Transfers to reserves, really that's not revenues. It's an internal transfer, right? So they strip it out. And then new debt issued, 6.35 million. Really that shouldn't be known as revenue, right? So they're stripping that out as well. And expenses, you're seeing they're budgeting 47 million and 20 million. Those were what was actually published in our presented budget documents for 2022. But again, transfers to reserves on the expense side. So those could be our landfill transfer, right? That we transfer into AMP. It's an internal transfer, really, right? So why are we going to include it in our published financials? It's something we do just to show council that, hey, your operations, you're bringing in this much and we're flowing it through to reserve. So if you keep going like debt, principal payments, again, a PSAB entry because it's a cash outlay, not an expense, right? Same with your capital expenditures. That's the PSAB key right there. So even though it's a cash outlay, again, PSAB standards say that you have to base your expenses on use or amortization. So then you can see we're adding in amortization, right? So this brings what you're seeing on the face of financials to PSAB budgeted figures. So it's not the world that you're used to living in when it comes to like what you're seeing on the published budgeted document. So great questions, really. you stumped us on one. So at the end of the day, this is where it gets a little bit messy when it comes to like accrual basis of accounting, right? So again, basing things on use and when the expense is incurred and not on cash outlay. I hope that clarifies.
Sorry, through the chair. So going back to the other $15 million in revenue, you're saying that that is from capital projects from 2021, didn't get done in 2021, so they were brought over to the budget of 2022, but have since been completed and you use that money. So the 1.5 million in there is left over from capital projects, potentially left over from capital projects that didn't get done in 2021. Okay, thank you. And then that explains the actual surplus being so different. Okay.
Any further questions from members of council? Seeing none, I will seek a mover and a seconder that the presentation of the 2022 audited financial statements for the town of Essex be received and that we adopt them as presented. Councillor McGuire Blaze, seconded by Councillor Hammond. Any further questions to the motion? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried unanimously. And I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Hammond, Councillor Deputy Mayor Shepley, any questions? All in favor? And that is carried. We'll see you at 6 o'clock. Thank you, Cynthia.